The night began with a soft tearing noise, like fabric stretching under its own weight, pulling her awake before the room fully settled. The blinking red light of the bedside camera pulsed in the darkness, steady and calm, making her wonder why the air felt heavier than usual. If she lived alone, who cast the tall, bending shadow that drifted across the wall in last night's recording? The house held its silence too tightly, as if listening to her heartbeat while something brushed along the hallway. She watched the footage again, seeing the blankets sink under a slow, invisible pressure, forming the shape of something resting beside her. A cold pulse spread across the room, and the camera lens fogged from inside, leaving behind a perfect fingerprint pressed deep and impossibly detailed on the glass. Morning light did little to calm the unease, settling in every corner of the house. She replayed the footage over and over, hoping the shifting blankets were just a trick of the camera, yet they folded with the steady weight of something settling beside her. The walls gave off soft knocks, irregular and spaced like a slow heartbeat, as if something inside them answered her breaths. When she paused the recording on the moving shadow, the outline stretched too tall, too thin, and moved with a calm that felt almost curious. The more she watched, the more the house seemed to tighten around her, as though annoyed that she noticed something she wasn't supposed to. And just before noon, the same warm hum from last night returned, weaving through the vents as if trying to get her attention. While reviewing the footage again, she noticed a reflection in the window near her sleeping form, a smear of movement that didn't belong. The reflection breathed out when she breathed in, its rhythm perfectly opposite her own, as if another presence shared the room, mimicking her in reverse. Stepping away from the window now, she felt the sharp shift in air temperature, cold at first, then strangely warm, like the room remembered being watched. A dull thud echoed down the hall, perfectly timed with her blink, as though something moved only in the space between her awareness. Every corner felt swollen with quiet tension, waiting for her to realize the next detail she had overlooked. Moving through each room, she checked locks and pushed on doors, listening for even the slightest sign of someone hiding nearby. Yet the soft hum drifted through the vents no matter where she went, following in slow, patient waves. When she reached the living room, she froze. The camera she knew she had unplugged the night before glowed with steady power. Its display showed the same room she stood in, but every movement appeared half a second behind reality, like the house was echoing her in real time. The delay wasn't random. It felt intentional, as though something had been practicing her movements before showing them back to her. A sharp, uneasy chill swept through the room, settling into her bones. Determined to find answers, she climbed into the narrow attic crawl space she had avoided since moving in. The latch was dusty, but the hinges showed fresh scrape marks sweeping outward, as though pushed from the inside. The hum grew warmer as she opened the hatch, brushing against her skin with a steady vibration. Her flashlight caught a small device resting on the insulation, a camera identical to her own, aimed directly at the hatch as if expecting her. Its lens shimmered, revealing another perfect fingerprint pressed inside the glass, matching the one from earlier. Then a soft breath of warm air moved past her ear, and the attic released a long, slow exhale that didn't belong to her. The attic's breath lingered with her long after she closed the hatch, clinging to the back of her neck like a whisper that refused to fade. She spent the next hours pacing the house, listening for any sign that the hum had followed her down, but the rooms stayed motionless, holding their silence too carefully. The recorded footage from the attic camera replayed through her mind, even though she hadn't dared to power it on. Something about the way it sat there, waiting and aimed so deliberately, suggested it hadn't been placed by an ordinary intruder. As twilight crept across the windows, the lights flickered in slow, rhythmic intervals, matching the pattern she had heard in the vents. The whole house seemed to pulse with the memory of last night, and every shadow stretched a little too far, as if bracing for whatever would step out of them next. As night settled again, she set up every camera she owned, placing them in a wide circle around the bedroom as though surrounding herself with electronic guardians. The air felt too still, almost rehearsed, and she wondered whether the house anticipated her preparations. When she lay down, The mattress trembled, as if settling under additional weight, though she hadn't moved a muscle. The vents released a low, warm vibration that traveled across the room, slipping beneath the blankets, brushing against her like a slow inhale. She closed her eyes only for a second, but in the darkness behind her eyelids she saw the shadowed figure from the hallway. Tall, patient, and closer than before. The moment she opened them again, the camera lights blinked in unison, as though acknowledging a presence she hadn't seen yet. She woke to the soft click of a recording device turning itself on, a sound she recognized instantly from the logs she'd studied. The room was colder now, far colder than the night before, as if something had drawn the warmth into its own shape. She reached for the nearest camera, but its screen flickered with static, then cleared to show her sleeping face from a strange angle, one she didn't recognize placing a camera in. The footage showed her body still, yet the blankets rose and fell with a weight beside her that didn't belong. She rewound the clip, hesitant, but the moment she pressed play, a dark shape leaned into the frame from behind her recorded self, its form bending as though inspecting her. When she glanced at the same spot in real time, the corner remained empty, too empty. Desperate for answers, she searched the oldest parts of the house again, tracing the narrow corridors behind the walls where the previous owner had once run cables. The deeper she went, the more the air thickened, layering with warmth that felt out of place in the cramped dark. The humming grew clearer now, shifting from mechanical vibration to something closer to a breath. Wet, steady, controlled. At the far end of the crawl passage, she found a small opening she had never noticed before, a splintered gap just wide enough for a person to watch through. The wood felt warm beneath her fingers, almost alive, and when she leaned close, she sensed movement beyond the sliver of darkness, something waiting silently, as though it had always known she would find it. She backed out of the crawl space with her heart thudding against the close walls, feeling the house shift around her as though adjusting to her discovery. The moment she returned to the main hallway, every light in the house clicked on at once, flooding the space with an unnatural glow. But beneath the brightness, the hum didn't stop. It grew warmer, deeper, vibrating through the floorboards in steady, heavy pulses. She felt a presence behind her, not touching but close enough to bend the air around her shoulders. When she turned, the hallway was empty, but the shadows cast by the lights didn't align with her shape. One stretched further, taller, bending at an angle she couldn't match. It lingered for a breath before easing back toward the bedroom, as if beckoning her to follow. She lingered at the edge of the hallway, staring at the stretched shadow that had retreated toward the bedroom, unsure whether following it would bring answers or only tighten the fear already twisting inside her. The hum had softened, almost soothing now, as if coaxing her to step closer. Every room behind her felt strangely detached, as though the house had folded space to focus all its attention on this one narrow path. When she finally moved, the lights flickered in a slow, synchronized pattern, guiding her toward the bedroom door that stood slightly open, waiting. She pushed it gently, and the room greeted her with a faint warmth drifting from the center of the floor, where the blankets lay untouched despite the chaos of the night before. The cameras around the bed clicked and whirred as though waking up, angling themselves toward her, even though she hadn't touched a single control. She approached the bed slowly, feeling the air tighten around her as though the room expected her next move. The hum rose again, steady and warm, vibrating through the floor in calm pulses that felt almost like a heartbeat beneath her feet. When she touched the blankets, the fabric lifted slightly, curling upward, as if responding to her presence, as though something invisible beneath them had shifted just enough to acknowledge her. The cameras clicked again, though she hadn't turned them on, and their indicator lights blinked in a slow, alternating rhythm. She felt the room lean toward her, as if everything within it waited for her to peel back the blankets and confront what lay beneath. Yet when she gathered the courage and pulled them aside, the space was empty, too empty, almost carved out, as though something large had lain there until moments before. The hollow impression in the mattress kept her frozen, the shape so clear it felt recent, as though whatever had occupied it lingered only seconds earlier. She stepped back, But the cameras around her buzzed to life, each screen displaying angles she didn't recall setting up. Overhead views, close-ups of her sleeping form from unfamiliar perspectives, and one showing a completely dark room she didn't recognize. As she studied the screens, one of them flickered, revealing a silhouette moving toward her sleeping body with unhurried calm. The figure bent close, as if smelling her breath before slipping out of frame. She rewound the clip, but the moment she pressed play, the same figure appeared on a second screen, this time much closer, its blurred outline filling the frame. She backed away from the screens, but their images followed her, shifting views without command, as though trying to show her something vital. The hum deepened again, but now it carried a rhythm she recognized. A measured inhale and exhale, as though the house itself were breathing. She opened the bedroom door, intending to flee down the hall. But the moment she stepped through, the corridor felt different. Longer, narrower, as if stretched to match the shape she had seen in the footage. The lights buzzed, flickering in uneven patterns, and with each dimming pulse, the shadow at the far end grew taller. A sudden push of warm air moved past her, brushing her neck like someone walking by, and she realized the breathing rhythm wasn't coming from the house at all. It was coming from the space behind her. She turned slowly, bracing for the figure she felt close behind, but nothing stood there, only a soft ripple in the air, as if it had just slipped out of sight. The hum shifted again, not from the vents this time, but from the floor beneath her feet, resonating upward in vibrating waves. A gentle, measured pressure pressed against her back, guiding her toward the hall, even though no one touched her. She resisted, but the pressure grew steadier, patient rather than forceful, like someone leading her toward a destination they believed she was ready to face. The walls around her seemed to bend inward, narrowing the path until she had no choice but to move. And as she took her first reluctant step, the lights at the end of the hallway went dark one by one, revealing a shape waiting in the dimness, its outline sharper than ever before. The shape at the end of the hallway remained perfectly still, yet the air around it quivered, bending faintly as though reality itself strained to hold its outline. She stood frozen, listening to the soft electrical hum coursing through the walls, a steady vibration that felt strangely like anticipation. When she stepped backward, the lights behind her flickered in warning, dimming in a slow sequence that pushed her attention forward again. The shadow didn't move, but something about its patience was more unsettling than anything she'd seen on the recordings. It waited like someone confident she would eventually come closer on her own. She felt the urge to blink, but every time she nearly did, the figure's edges fuzzed, ready to shift the moment she wasn't watching. The hallway felt longer than it had any right to be, stretching with each step she didn't take, as if urging a confrontation she wasn't prepared to face. She forced herself to move, inching forward not out of courage, but because staying felt equally dangerous. The hum deepened, spreading through the floor in slow, warm pulses that guided her toward the shadowed end of the corridor. With each step she took, the lights above her fizzled and dimmed, leaving only a thin trail of illumination ahead. Halfway down the hallway, she felt the walls pulse inward, narrowing the space until it barely allowed her to pass. She stopped again, uncertain whether the figure still waited or had slipped out of sight in her hesitation. The darkness beyond the last working light thickened, shifting with a faint ripple like something breathing within it. The air warmed around her cheek, brushing across her skin in a familiar rhythm she'd felt before. Steady, measured, close enough to mimic the quiet breathing that had hovered beside her bed on the recordings. The darkness ahead suddenly cracked with a soft, clicking sound like a camera powering on. She froze, recognizing the noise instantly. She had heard it every night for weeks. A dim red glow appeared within the shadows, pulsing with the same familiar rhythm as the recordings. She leaned forward, and the glow sharpened into the unmistakable indicator light of a camera aimed directly at her. But she hadn't placed any device in the hallway. The lens adjusted itself, narrowing its focus as if studying her reaction. Her breath faltered as she spotted movement behind the camera, A slow, deliberate shift of weight, barely visible yet undeniably human. The figure lingered just beyond the reach of the red glow, tall and patient, as though waiting for her to acknowledge it. She stepped back, but the camera clicked again, a slow, knowing sound, like an invitation to be seen. The hum rose sharply, vibrating through the walls in rapid bursts that made the air feel electric. The light from the camera's indicator blinked faster, matching the rhythm, casting brief crimson flashes across the corridor. She tried to retreat, but the hallway behind her tightened, as though the very structure of the house resisted letting her escape. The red glow swelled, flooding the shadows around the camera, and for a moment she saw a distorted reflection of herself in the lens, stretched, warped, and watching from a place she didn't recognize. A warm exhale brushed her neck, too close to mistake for anything mechanical. She spun around, expecting to see the figure looming behind her, but the hallway remained empty. When she faced forward again, the camera had moved several inches closer, though no sound had signaled its approach. She realized the house wasn't reacting to her. It was reacting to him. The lights, the hum, the shifting walls, all bending around the presence she couldn't fully see. The figure behind the camera stepped slightly forward, its shadow stretching across the hall until it overlapped her feet, thin and reaching. The pressure in the air deepened, warming around her shoulders as though guiding her toward the device. She felt compelled to lift her gaze to the lens again, drawn by some invisible pull. When she did, the reflection staring back wasn't her own. It blinked out of sync, its expression unfamiliar and hollow. The hallway lights went out at once, plunging everything into near darkness, except the faint, red glow illuminating the figure's shape. It leaned closer, its outline sharpening into something disturbingly deliberate, as though preparing to speak, even without a voice. The red glow softened for a moment, dimming as though the device were catching its breath. She stood in the darkness, suspended between the urge to run and the strange pull drawing her closer. The hum eased into a deeper, slower rhythm, almost soothing, if not for the pressure that crept along the floor. When the lens blinked again, something behind it shifted, no longer hiding in the edges of the frame, but leaning into the faint light. She could feel a presence rise inside the air, thickening it until each inhale tasted warm and metallic. The quiet that followed was heavier than silence. It was expectant, waiting for her to make a sound. She didn't move, but the walls around her narrowed again, as if the house wanted to deliver her to whatever waited before her. Then, with no warning, the camera's motor whirred sharply, angling itself upward to capture her from below, as though documenting a moment she hadn't yet lived. She stepped back, but the device followed, shifting slowly across the floor in a silent glide, keeping the lens fixed on her face. The air around her tightened, warm and strangely directed, as though something guided each breath toward her. She reached for the wall, hoping for some anchor, but the surface felt wrong, soft in places, pulsing faintly as if something moved beneath the paint. The hum shifted again, narrowing into a single long vibration that trembled along her spine. She knew the figure was closer now, even before she sensed the temperature change behind her. The darkness thickened, shaping itself into something tall and steady. The soft brush of air that skimmed past her ear didn't feel like a breeze. It felt deliberate, familiar from countless recordings she hadn't understood until now. She ran. Not fast, not gracefully, but enough to break whatever invisible grip urged her forward. The hallway quaked with her footsteps, every light trembling as though trying to keep up with her movement. The hum did not fade. It followed, deepening into a heated pulse that rushed behind her like breath against the back of her neck. When she reached the living room, the cameras she'd set earlier flicked on simultaneously, their indicator lights blinking in chaotic rhythm. Screens filled with footage that shouldn't have existed. Angles of her running before she had even moved. Shots of the hallway stretching impossibly long, and glimpses of a figure standing in doorways she hadn't passed through yet. She turned toward the nearest exit, but the door shuddered and clicked, closing itself with a gentle finality that felt almost polite. The house had made its decision. She backed away from the door, her breaths sharp and uneven. But the house responded with the same patient rhythm it had kept since the first strange night. The screens around her flickered into a new sequence, each showing the same moment from a different angle. Her standing alone, framed by darkness, unaware of something rising behind her. She spun, but found nothing. When she looked back at the screens, something had changed. The shadow that hovered behind her recorded self now lifted its head, slowly, deliberately, as though acknowledging that she finally understood. The warm hum latched onto her pulse, sensing with it in a steady beat that grew louder with each passing second. The room brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again, as if something vast had inhaled deeply and was preparing to exhale. The light snapped off, plunging everything into darkness so sudden it felt physical, wrapping around her like heavy cloth. She couldn't see the screens anymore, but she could hear them powering down one by one, each soft click echoing like a countdown. The hum vanished completely, replaced by a slow, deliberate breathing that came from somewhere close. Too close to identify. A warm exhale brushed the side of her neck, and before she could turn, another breath followed, moving across her shoulder with unsettling calm. The darkness shifted, thickening as though something stepped closer, shaping itself just out of her reach. She raised a hand, searching blindly, and the moment her fingers brushed the air ahead, the breathing stopped. A single camera clicked on behind her, casting a faint glow that stretched her shadow across the wall. Except her shadow wasn't alone. The second shadow stretched beside hers with unnerving certainty, perfectly shaped, perfectly still, as though it had always belonged there. She didn't dare move at first, afraid it would shift in a way her body hadn't. The air around her changed again, warming with a slow pulse that crept along her spine. Behind her, the single camera's glow flickered, rippling across the walls like a heartbeat trapped inside its frame. She listened for breathing, but the silence thickened, pressing closer with a weight that felt almost curious. When she finally stepped forward, her shadow followed. But the taller one didn't. It stayed anchored in place, bending slightly at the top as if tilting its head to watch her move. The room felt too small now, like the walls had pulled inward to keep her from escaping. The air vibrated softly, as if the house were waiting for her next breath. She tried to retreat, but with every backward step her shadow snapped into place instantly, while the taller one lagged just a fraction behind, moving only when she wasn't directly facing it. The delay felt intentional, like it was choosing when to reveal itself. She turned sharply to catch it moving, but the moment she did, it froze again, bending subtly as though amused by her attempts to understand it. The screen behind her flickered harder, the glow pulsing against the walls in waves that made her stomach twist. She could sense something inching closer, not physically, but in the way the air folded around her, thickening until she felt surrounded. Every instinct screamed to run. Yet the house seemed to anticipate her thoughts, sealing off each imagined escape route with quiet, confident certainty. The hum returned without warning, a deep, resonant vibration rising from beneath the floorboards, steady and unmistakably alive. The lights overhead dimmed, then flared with warm intensity, bathing the room in soft gold for a heartbeat, before sinking back into darkness. She felt the heat gather behind her, a slow swell that pressed gently toward her shoulder. When she turned, she saw nothing, except the shifting glow of the single camera. The shadows on the wall, however, told a different story. The taller one had stepped closer, its silhouette sharper, clearer, no longer content to linger at a distance. The shape seemed to study her posture, matching her breathing now in a rhythm that felt deliberate. She lifted a trembling hand, and both shadows responded, though one moved too smoothly, too slowly, as though savoring the act of being noticed. She backed away from the wall, but the taller shadow drifted forward, its form gliding unnaturally as though carried by a different set of rules. The soft hum beneath her feet began to pulse faster now, sensing with her heartbeat until the rhythm blurred into one overwhelming thrum. The room darkened again, but this time only the space around her dimmed, while the far corner of the room brightened with a gentle glow she didn't recognize. Something stirred within that faint light, shifting like someone just out of view. She could feel a presence rising there, warm and towering, its attention settling on her with steady patience. The air grew dense, thickening until her breaths came in short, strained bursts. When the glow flickered, she glimpsed movement in the corner. Too tall to be her imagination, too real to dismiss. The glow intensified, soft but sure, revealing the outline more clearly as it leaned forward, stepping slowly into the thinning darkness. She felt the temperature shift again, warmer and more directed, as if the air itself turned toward her. The house seemed to hold its breath, every surface pausing mid-creak, as though giving this moment space. She tried to look away, but the presence in the corner drew her gaze back with quiet command. It moved with impossible smoothness, its steps silent, its form expanding, until the room felt too small to contain it. The camera behind her clicked once, then again, adjusting its angle to frame both her and the towering shape. The shadows on the wall wavered, merging briefly as though acknowledging a final approach. She braced herself, sensing the moment she had avoided since the first recording was almost upon her. The moment the towering silhouette stepped fully into view, the house fell into a silence so deep it felt carved out of the air itself. She stood trembling as the presence closed the space between them without making a single sound. The glow behind it faded, leaving only the faint pulse of the camera as the sole light source. Every instinct pushed her to flee, yet her legs refused to obey, as though something unseen held her firmly in place. The figure's shadow stretched across the wall, sliding over hers with a slow inevitability that made her breath catch. The hum she had heard for weeks returned, but now it came from within the shape itself. Steady, warm, and impossibly human. With each faint vibration, the room tightened around them until even the space between heartbeats felt unbearably loud. The presence paused inches away, close enough that the warmth radiating from it brushed against her skin. She expected a hand to reach out, a voice, a movement, anything to make sense of the entity looming before her. But no gesture came. Instead, the camera behind them clicked again, its lens adjusting to capture the moment as though it had been waiting for this encounter from the start. She felt the rhythm within the figure shift, smoothing into a gentle pulse that washed over her like a tide. The shadows on the wall twitched, bending out of sync before slipping back together. Her throat tightened as she sensed the figure leaning closer, not in threat but in something almost resembling recognition. It felt like it knew her, like it had known her far longer than the days she had recorded herself. The figure shifted ever so slightly, and the temperature around her rose, a warm, steady pressure that wrapped her like a slow embrace. The house seemed to breathe with them now, its walls expanding and contracting in a rhythm she couldn't ignore. The camera's glow flickered, brightening the figure's shape just enough to reveal faint contours, broad shoulders, the suggestion of a bowed head, and something impossibly patient in its stillness. She felt the presence leaning toward her again, not with force, but with the quiet insistence of someone trying to be understood. Her pulse quickened, yet she sensed no malice in the movement. Instead, the pressure in the air seemed to ask a question she didn't have the words to answer. When she took a trembling half-step back, the figure mirrored her with slow, deliberate grace. She wasn't sure when she noticed the room shrinking again, folding inward with gentle persistence, but it became impossible to ignore as the walls drifted closer. The cameras clicked in a soft, rhythmic pattern, adjusting angles on their own, capturing every breath, every tremor, every shifting thread of shadow. She felt suspended between two choices: to run and be swallowed by the narrowing hallways, or to remain and confront the presence that had filled her nights with fear and fascination. The hum deepened once more, resonating inside her ribs until her heartbeat matched its pattern. The figure's outline shimmered, almost flickered, as if it existed in two places at once. It reached the edge of the camera's glow, pausing like someone about to step into a doorway. The room seemed to hold its final breath. The glow from the camera swelled, bright and sudden, bathing the room in a pulse of light that washed over everything in a soft, disorienting wave. She shielded her eyes, but the warmth pushed gently against her hands, guiding them downward. When she finally looked, the figure stood perfectly still, no longer shifting, no longer melting into shadows. For the first time, she sensed it waiting for her to decide what happened next. The hum faded into silence, leaving nothing but her uneven breathing and the faint ticking of the camera cooling down. Then, in one slow movement, the figure stepped backward into the darkness, its outline dissolving into the corner from which it had emerged. The shadows on the wall pulled apart, returning to their natural shapes, and just before the last trace disappeared, the camera clicked one final time, capturing only the empty room and the faint echo of something that had finally let her go.